Welcome to this podcast reflecting on the April 2026 issue of BeeCraft magazine and looking forward to what's in store in some forthcoming issues. If you'd like to subscribe to the international award-winning magazine, please go to www.bee-craft.com. Good morning, Richard. I believe you've had a look at your bees this year already. I haven't. I've been away and I missed that really good weather.
Yes, I have, and I'm pleased to report that I've lost from 30, around about 30 colonies, just one. And to be fair, I think I deserved that. I should have, it was a small colony and I should have united them at the end of the season. But they're all looking good. They're expanding very rapidly. But actually, I this weekend went down to the Welsh convention to speak to them there, and pretty much most of the talks seem to be about quite substantial losses.
Yes, I've heard a lot of reports of losses around here. I'm in the North Hampshire, Newbury area, and as I say, I'm not quite sure of the situation in my colonies yet. Can only guess at it. Although my observation hive's doing really nicely. They were very quiet at the beginning of the year. I wondered if she was going to start laying again, but she's off and running, and I had to give them a frame of food yesterday. They're doing so well.
Yeah, I'm keeping a very close eye on stores in my colonies because they're getting through it very rapidly now, and it's got cold again, and there's not much chance to get out, and there's plenty of brood in there, so I'm keeping an eye on that. But there's lots of speculation about what may have been causing this, and a lot of people are talking about the fact that their losses seem to be very sudden and very late. So they may have checked their colonies in February, and they've gone back to look at them now, and there's nothing much at all to be found.
I've got one suspect colony like this that looked good a month or so ago, and now I've got severe doubts about it. So I can't wait to open it up, but still the weather's not good enough for me. But there we go. I was really interested in this issue that bees do go after bluebells, which I see are very early this year, just coming into bloom. And our mentors in the Ask the Mentor section, there's a whole piece about bluebells and using it as forage. I was really surprised at that. I didn't think they worked bluebells at all.
There's a lovely photograph from Christine Coulsting who answered that particular question of her apiary surrounded by bluebells. And actually, I have one apiary surrounded by bluebells, and I certainly see the bees coming back with that lovely icy white pollen. They collect pollen, but I have actually also photographed. I've only seen once or twice bees clearly taking nectar, and they will push their proboscis down through not through holes at the base of the flower as they do when they're robbing, but between the petals. And my observation is that it seems to be when the bluebells are in a patch that's been cleared and there's sunshine coming through. If it gets plenty of sun, I don't know if it's because there's more warmth or whatever, but then they seem to be the flowers that they're visiting.
Yeah, that makes sense. Who would want to go into a dark wood if you were a bee? We should actually mention to people abroad, because we are getting listeners from the USA, Belgium, Germany, Hong Kong, Ireland, Italy, Latvia, Norway. Not all of them will have seen the beauty of bluebell woods, one of the great attractions of the British Isles at this time of year.
Yeah, the British native bluebell is a really beautiful flower, the most amazing purpley blue colour. And as you say, it's an amazing sight to see. I can't remember the statistic, but it's a very large proportion of that particular bluebell, of the world's stock of them, is found here in the UK.
And sadly, they're impossible to photograph. You never really get the impression of how beautiful that is in a photograph.
No, it's an ethereal kind of blue haze, isn't it? And when you try to photograph it, it doesn't come across at all.
No. Anyway, we should get on and talk a bit more about this issue. What was your favourite article?
Well, at the risk of flagging up something I've written myself, I really enjoy. There's an article written after we visited Hereford last year, which is the hometown of a fascinating gentleman called Alfred Watkins, a late Victorian beekeeper, photographer. I suppose he was a millionaire in his day. He had the good fortune to be born into a wealthy family of brewers, and he became fascinated in beekeeping, and he was a early photographer. And we have an article based on some of the things that we saw when we visited the library in Hereford, which contains some of his beekeeping equipment, but most importantly, his beautiful glass plate images of
We had a lovely piece, a student essay in a competition that we ran last year from Drew Simons, and I thought it was a terrific piece about him learning about his beekeeping from a veteran beekeeper. I think this is well worth anybody reading. Everybody will relate to this, I think. Drew is just 22 years of age, and he signs off saying, I hope to be just like him. That's his mentor. I'm privileged to have been shown that even in the smallest of places, entire worlds may exist. But Richard, there was a program on TV recently that you had a very early insight of. Can you tell us about that?
Oh yes, this has been getting a lot of attention online. It was shown on BBC Two, I think it was last week, a film called My Garden of a Thousand Bees. And it's a really delightful, fascinating insight into the species of bumblebee and solitary bee that can be found in a very modest urban garden. In fact, the garden is very small and right in the centre of Bristol, in city centre Bristol. And I heard about this film. It was filmed during lockdown. Martin Dawn, who's a wildlife cameraman, got stuck at home during lockdown with all the equipment that he needed. He was about to go off and film, I think it was ants or something like that in Africa or somewhere. And of course, he couldn't go because of lockdown. He had the equipment at home. He'd been sort of cultivating this garden of wild bees and thought, well, I'll film those because I can't go out and film anything else. And the film was finished 3 years ago. And I saw an early copy of it and found it absolutely delightful. And I interviewed Martin, and it made a lovely article, and we were able to have some fascinating, lovely close-ups of the bees in his garden. But extraordinarily, he couldn't sell the film. He took it to the BBC and broadcasters around the world, and they were, frankly more interested in seeing lions chasing antelope and such like, and thought people wouldn't be interested in bees. But it's just been shown on the BBC, and it's getting a lot of coverage. There have been articles in the Guardian, the Times, lots of chatter in the beekeeping forums. But as I said, we had an article about him and the film and how it was made 3 years ago. In fact,
Wow,
it was
was it
April,
that long? Whoa.
April 2022.
Right, okay.
So that shows you how ahead of the curve we are here at at BeeCraft. But if anybody missed the film, you can watch it on iPlayer still, BBC iPlayer. It's there. I don't know how long for, but I think we could probably put a link to it, can't we, Stephen, on
Yeah.
in the next issue.
Oh, and we can put a link in this podcast, in the text below this podcast. So I'll do that when we release this. Yeah, it was such a good film that all my friends who know I'm interested in bees have been telling me to watch it.
Yeah.
Of course, I saw it live. It
Yeah.
really is spectacular.
But it's an interesting lesson in how even a very modest garden can be a terrific place for bees. He's got this city centre garden, which is very, very, very modest indeed. And it's just because of the way that he manages it, or perhaps doesn't manage it too much, and the various logs and bricks and piles of sand and whatnot that he's allowed the bees to use in there. I think he reckons there are over 60 species of bee in that one garden, which is right in the centre of Bristol.
Incredible. I wonder what's happening in my garden. I might be embarrassed to know how many bees there are there. There's a really good article from Dr. Melanie von Orlo from a Berlin conservation and biodiversity organization. Martin Kunz, our special correspondent, has dug that out from a German publication and translated it for us. I thought it was a really good counterpoint to all the messages we're getting about honeybees. Talks about the forage that we should all be planting if at all possible, and that really honeybees are being maligned in in pretty thoughtless ways. It's an article well worth reading, and lots of good references for that for anybody who wants to follow that up seriously.
Yeah, it seems that in Germany and other places, there's quite a lot of legislation coming in restricting where honeybees can be kept. Some of which perhaps is understandable, but very much of it just isn't really at all, I think. I should
No,
say
a
that
lot.
article's got some lovely photographs in it as well, hasn't it, by Martin,
Yeah.
of
Yes.
some of the solitary bee species and so on. Really worth looking at.
Yeah. Yes. In Germany, around the nature reserves, they're putting quarantine zones that you can't keep beehives and so on and
Mm,
so forth.
mm.
And Dr. von Orlo questions that and wonders if it's actually damaging in that it's not providing corridors for bees and pollination to actually happen. An article really well worth reading.
And in fact, it's considerably damaged the beekeeping on the Luneburg Heath, which is famous for its heather
Yeah.
and Skep beekeeping. There's that wonderful film which you can find on YouTube if you want to look it up of Skep beekeeping on the Luneburg Heath. I'd recommend looking for that.
Yes, that is a brilliant one. I'll put a link into that
Yeah,
in
yeah,
this
yeah,
podcast text as well.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, we've been out and
I'll-
about, Stephen, haven't we? Quite a lot this month. You've had an exciting week or so.
well, it was really quite poignant because I went to see Pompeii and Herculaneum, those Roman cities that had been covered by the ash and breccia and all sorts of stuff coming out of Vesuvius. And it took me back to a visit I had to Apamundia this year, where I saw an ancient bee nest from 1300 years ago. And I thought, yeah, this bee nest is really the bees Pompeii. Polish guys had brought this to Apamundia to show this nest that had survived all this time. This nest had survived because the tree had fallen into water, been covered by mud, got anaerobic conditions, which had preserved it beautifully. And I thought, wow, this is. When I was in Pompeii, I kept thinking of this nest and thought, yeah, this is really neat.
Mm-hmm.
This is the bees Pompeii. The beekeepers had one advantage over the archaeologists in Pompeii in that they actually had the bees, specimens of bees from the period, which in Pompeii they've only been able to put plaster casts into the hollows that where people were because the bodies had rotted away. But in the bee nest, they'd actually got the bees, and they were able to establish that they were Apis mellifera, not Apis carnica, which they half expected it to be because it's on the borderline between the two. But
Mm-hmm.
no, all those years ago, it was Apis mellifera.
Mm. Fascinating. And strangely enough, I've also seen some Roman ruins this month, but they were in the centre of London. I was up there for a meeting, and there's some sections of the Roman wall in central London which you can still see, and somebody keeps a few hives of bees amongst them. So I didn't feel entirely left out when you were sending me your WhatsApp messages of your lovely foreign travels. And I was up there in London. One of the things I was doing was visiting Bankers Hall, which is the old headquarters of Lloyds Bank, which I wrote about in last month's issue of BeeCraft, because Lloyds Bank's corporate logo used to be a skep of bees, now sadly replaced by the famous black horse. But the original headquarters, after a little bit of cajoling, I was allowed in and made very welcome. It's a beautiful building, but most excitingly, of course, for us beekeepers, is it has lots of emblems of skeps and bees built into the structure of it. So that's something that we will feature in a future magazine.
Yeah. Speaking of future magazines, we should have a nice article coming up about buzzcopper, that new device that's being developed that's well down the road. It's just got to go into greater production levels that will automatically identify Asian hornets. Very cheap device, very low cost device, really well engineered. Absolutely fascinating story. I was speaking to the inventor of it yesterday, John Semple, and I think we should have him on the podcast next time to talk a bit more about that. But that should be really good. Meanwhile, of course, we've all got to prepare for swarms, and I'm glad to see that you wrote an article about setting up and using bait hives. Mind you, in my garden, I don't need them. They just come in, like buses, like trolley buses. You get one, and then they all come in. They just find cracks in boxes that I have and occupy them. So I am the supplier of bees in the local community to new beekeepers.
I've never known anybody's garden attract as many swarms as yours does, and and you always claim they're not yours, but who knows?
They never are. Mine aren't even in the garden.
They just arrive in your garden. That's good. Oh, now just very briefly, one thing about this month's magazine. It's very nice to see Ted Benton back again, who's been writing for us for 2 or 3 years now. I think probably maybe more.
Yeah, yeah.
Who is a very well-respected expert on bees, but all sorts of other insects, and he has a column every month about different kinds of insects that you may come across. And this month it's what are they called? Groundhoppers.
The slender groundhopper.
Not grasshoppers, but groundhoppers. Never heard of them.
Yeah,
Although by the
difficult to
looks of it, I
see.
may have trodden on a few because they're like grasshoppers, but they stick to the ground, and they disguise themselves according to whatever kind of terrain they're on. So they look fascinating. So I'll be looking out for those this summer. But every month we wonder what article Ted's going to send through with his lovely photographs of them.
Yeah, really good. And we should close by just mentioning the photo of the month, which is a wonderful photograph that happened, I think, almost by accident. It turned out so well. And it's an inspection of beehives going on with the rain coming down. And the rain is a star attraction. Suddenly a shower appeared, and rain appears coming streaking across the apiary. Really beautiful photograph.
It's a lovely photo because it's a beautiful garden. The hives are nicely painted. The photographer is Sally Ewan. And if you're interested in bee photography, I'd recommend looking her up on Instagram because her bee photography is lovely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, that's all for this month. Look forward to hearing about buzzcopper next month, but that will be in the magazine even before we get to speak about it on the podcast. And anything else lined up, Richard, that you can think of?
Well, what about guests for next month? I think we've got somebody probably lined up.
Yes, well, we will have John Semple from Buzzcopper, but we're also waiting to have George Tong, who does the illustrations for us, the very amusing illustrations. I hope to have him along soon. He's also a bee inspector, so he'll be getting very busy soon, I suspect. And I hope he's not too busy with so many colonies being reported as being lost, but we'll see how that goes.
Well, maybe he'll afford us a small gap between dealing with lost colonies and then the start of the Asian hornet season. Looking for those yellow.
I should also mention, of course, the display in Basingstoke about butler and bees. Really nice display in the Willis Museum. Highly recommend going on to see that. That's going to be open until the 28th of June. Yes, surprising place to happen in Basingstoke, perhaps, but you can also go, if you visit the museum, you can also go just 5 miles away and see Butler's Church and the magnificent stained glass window. I highly recommend that to anybody.
Really worth doing.
Okay, well, bye for this month, and be back next time.
Yeah. See you then.
Bye.